Hey there, folks, and welcome to another edition of Israel Explained. I think the one thing that's really been kind of missing in these videos has been addressing the human toll that this war has taken on Israeli society and on Palestinian society. We've mostly been focusing on diplomacy and strategy, which is, my specialty, and a lot of what's important is going on. But the two things are often intertwined, and there's always a danger of starting to look at war too much as pieces moving on a chessboard or something like that. That's not something that we really want to fall into. So as we know, Israelis have suffered a lot in this war, but so have Palestinians, and Palestinians have suffered more. And I don't subscribe to the whole idea that there's no such thing as innocent Palestinians and no such thing as civilians and all that sort of thing. I don't think that someone's political leanings, choices, even if they involve supporting terrorism, mean that they can be killed at will, tortured, and deprived of human rights. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at the plight of Palestinian refugees, and particularly how they fit into plans to end the war, how they've also turned into a strategic problem alongside a humanitarian problem, and see what can be done about it, and what solutions we have. So, as we know, the refugee issue in this war, and it's important to clarify, when I say refugees, I'm not talking about refugee status based on 1948 and 1967, which is a controversial issue, not what we're talking about here today. I'm talking about actual immediate refugees, people who have had to clear out of their homes because of this conflict, because they're not safe, and often because they've been told by the IDF to leave their homes, or they could face serious consequences. So those sorts of refugees. As you remember, this problem, an issue, started when Israel asked that all refugees, that all citizens living in northern Gaza evacuate to the south. The plan at that point was to go into Gaza City and the areas surrounding it, and it felt that it could minimize risk to civilians and fight Hamas more effectively if civilians evacuated. At first, the people of the north were hesitant to leave. They might have felt this wouldn't be that serious a war. They might have felt that they'd have good chances of surviving where they are, and a understandable human reluctance to leave their homes. But after a while, that started to change. Hamas had at first been trying to keep the Gazan refugees in the north. They lost their ability to do that, and as the attacks became more intense, more people started moving to the south. Overall, 1.9 million people, that's 85% of Gaza's population, are believed to be displaced right now. Um, Israel hasn't really put in place a good plan for what to do with the people from the south who are increasingly being displaced. In the north, you could say go to the south, find refuge in Rafah and other places. But now Rafah is increasingly unsafe. Rafah is increasingly overcrowded. Remember, it had a pre-war population of 280,000 people, and now it probably has the vast majority of refugees. So something like an extra million on top of that, overloading the already vulnerable infrastructure in the area. So a lot of people from the north moved first to Khan Yunis, and once Khan Yunis became the fulcrum of the IDF attack, moved into Rafah. Israel tried to designate an area called the Al-Mawasi, which is a rural strip mostly populated by Bedouins, as a evacuation zone, but the facilities there aren't enough for a lot of people. Most people did not go there, although there are tent cities in that area, and Israel has largely left it alone. So Israel put into place an order that anyone living to the north of the Wadi Gaza riverbed should move to the south, and they have moved to the south. Then Israel erected a security barrier between the north and south, and therefore, if you've gone to the south, you can't return home. And those are still the orders that the IDF has. Um, in order to find some kind of solution for the south, Israel released an interactive map, one that was shared all over the place, with different zones, where it would tell the population which zones were going to be bombed and which zones were not going to be bombed. This turned out to be very cumbersome, uh, complicated. Israel hasn't always followed that map, and a lot of people in Gaza don't have internet, don't have electricity, don't have charged phones, so they're not able to constantly check if their zone's being attacked or hasn't been attacked. So that hasn't been much of a success. So basically, right now we're left with a mess. We have a lot of refugees in the south, but the south is the area being attacked. So paradoxically, the north, aside from some pockets of resistance, most of which have been more or less dealt with, like Jabalia, to a lesser extent, Sajawiya, that's where we don't have civilians. Meanwhile, we have a ton of civilians in the south where Israel is moving. In fact, some generals in the IDF want the army to move to Rafah next, which is where all the refugees are. So Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, he said Israel should start considering moving residents to the north. But the IDF is very concerned about that, or certain commanders in the IDF are very concerned about that. They're worried that once residents return to the north, a lot of the people there will be Hamas, and then the areas that Israel purified of terrorists through hard struggle and losing a lot of soldiers will return to be um, occupied by Hamas members, and then Israel will be back in square one, trying to fight against Hamas in the same areas it's already fought at with civilians all around them. Not anything Israel wants. The counter argument, of course, is that it would thin out the south, which is where Israel's fighting him. So you can see how there's really no good solution for Israel as long as the refugees stay there. And just as importantly, there's no really good solution for Palestinian civilians. No matter where they go, it will turn into a war zone, whether they want it to or not. The North will probably become a war zone again if they go back. The South is now becoming increasingly a war zone. There's really no way, nowhere to go. So then you have the question, where would they return? What what is waiting for them in northern Gaza? I was just looking at some satellite images analyzed by Corey Scher of CUNY Graduate Center and Jaman van den Hoek of Oregon State University. Their map, based on satellite imagery, shows that the vast majority of buildings in Gaza City have been destroyed. 20% of the buildings in Khan Yunis have also been destroyed, and that will be going up every day. Some neighborhoods have been completely destroyed, notably Sajawiya, which Israel may be making a policy of basically razing to the ground and never allowing it to be reoccupied. I don't think the final decision on that has been made. Now, from a Palestinian perspective, having this kind of scale of refugees reminds them of the national trauma of the Nakba. In fact, the Nakba, what the Palestinians call the Nakba, which is the refugee crisis where 750,000 Palestinians were either forced out of their homes or left their homes voluntarily in the 1948 war, although a lot of that started in 1947. This wave of immigration is actually, or refugees, is actually significantly larger than the Nakba. We're talking about 1.2 million. So, understandably, a lot of Palestinians are feeling that their trauma here is coming up, and they sense or fear that Israel is trying to do a second Nakba. Some ill-advised comments from Israeli politicians have reinforced that feeling. Avi Dichter very unhelpfully called this operation the rolling out of Nakba 2023. And though Dichter is not one of the main decision makers, he is part of the security cabinet, and his words have weight. There were other unfortunate op-eds and things like that talking about encouraging people to leave Gaza. That obviously stiffen defense and resistance to Israel taking over Gaza, although there's plenty of that anyway, but also will sour our relations with other countries. It's hard to support this operation abroad if people feel that Israel is doing this in order to commit war crimes rather than in order to fight a terrorist organization. So I think Israel must guarantee that the refugees should be able to return home at the end of the war. Um, so the humanitarian toll of this has been immense. The hospital capacity in the north is virtually non-existent, and the hospital capacity in the south has been halved. With a lack of clean running water, medication, and other supplies, that is increasingly leading to fears of breaking out of various plagues. I've seen that when Israeli soldiers are being tested in the hospitals after they come back, they have been exposed to all sorts of bacteria because the atmosphere in Gaza is very unsafe. It's basically a disaster waiting to happen. So the truth of the matter is that not enough thought has gone into this. Israel seemed to have planned the northern part of the operation quite well in this regard, but once it went to the south, it really seemed to run out of ideas. The United States has also been notably absent on this front. It's been pressuring Israel to do all sorts of things, um, but a lot of the resolution of this problem depends on the Arab states, most particularly Egypt. Egypt has a border with Gaza, obviously, one that's been very hesitant to open. Large, empty desert wastelands where the international community could create refugee camps, temporary ones, because as I said, they have to return. Jordan has said that it is willing to take some refugees, and they said that that's part of their identity to take Palestinian refugees, but it's not clear how serious they are, and it's not clear how they would get there to begin with. But those are things that need to be explored. There's been pressure on Egypt. Israel's put pressure on Egypt. The US has put pressure on Egypt. They've been considering it. So far, they haven't budged. So there needs to be a lot more of that. The Arab world and the international community need to look not only at trying to stop Israel from firing, which Israel's not going to do anytime soon, but also at taking more concrete steps to alleviate the suffering of the refugees. I think one of the problems is that some Arab states, and certainly Hamas and Iran and the terrorist organizations, know that if the refugee crisis is resolved, it would ease, or resolved is the wrong word, if the refugee crisis was addressed better, it would ease Israel's ability to complete this military operation, and that's not something they want. And as we know from 1948, this isn't the first time Palestinian refugees have been the victims of manipulation by actors who are trying to use them as a weapon against Israel. And there needs to be a lot more of a focus on that. The US needs to play a much bigger role in this because they can influence Arab states into helping far more. And they should save some of the pressure they're putting on Israel for that. Okay. As usual, we have some great questions from you. Yom asks, we all know right now moral support for Israel in this ongoing war in Gaza is lessening and switching more and more due to the civilian death tolls. How long do you think it would take before Israel loses complete support from the United States due to the public pressure? Or do you think the United States would continue their complete support for Israel's right to defend itself? Yeah, so I think this question portrays um, American support for Israel as very yes or no. And if it was portrayed as yes or no, the answer is yes. The Biden administration supports Israel, will continue to support Israel in the long term. Having said that, the United States has clear priorities and interests that it's trying to shape the war into meeting. So instead of completely cutting off support for Israel, it's trying to pressure Israel in various ways into doing things that it wants through agreement, through trying to build some sort of consensus through negotiation. So Israel's not going to lose complete support. unless things change greatly. The Biden administration has said that aid is not going to be discontinued and support is not going to be discontinued. They have set timetables for when Israel needs to stop. They haven't said Israel can't go beyond a certain amount of casualties because that's A, unrealistic, B, there's no reliable measure of casualties. The numbers that everyone keeps quoting are from the Hamas Ministry of Health, which is not a reliable source. So right now, Israel is fighting the war more or less according to what the United States wants it to, and that means that the U.S. will continue to support it. I would say the one danger for Israel, as far as U.S. support, the major danger is the Palestinian state issue. If Israel doesn't give some scope for the creation of a Palestinian state, then U.S. support will be put in danger. I think they'll find a way to finesse that. So I don't think the United States will withdraw support from Israel unless Israel plays their cards very badly. And I think this is important enough that Israel will not do that. John Price asks, what is the number of IDF casualties expected or bearable for an almost eradication of Hamas, both from Bibi's point of view and society's point of view? Boy, that's a really, really tough question. The trouble is, with answering that, is that Israel is a democratic state, and everyone has a very different perception of the price that's being willing to be paid for this goal. But the honest truth is Israel's nowhere near reaching that kind of breaking point for losses. Right now, Israel has over 100 killed in the ground war. Obviously, it has hundreds more that were killed on October 7th. Um, I think Israel will be willing to bear much, much, much greater losses than that. Most Israelis feel this is an existential war. And when you have an existential war, um, you feel that the losses that you bear are justified. So nowhere near that. Things start to change when you feel like it's a war of choice. So Israel withdrew from Lebanon in 2000 after losing a lot of soldiers because it felt like it didn't have to be there. And that was probably true. Israel didn't have to be there, although it certainly served its interests to be there. But in this case, Israelis feel like if they don't bring the fight to Hamas and eradicate Hamas, their country can't exist. So the losses they're willing to take are very, very high. I don't believe that we will reach that point of breaking in Israeli society in that regard. Also, Israel has proven, for whatever social reasons, to be more willing to take deaths on the battlefield than to take hostages. Hostages are the real point of weakness in Israeli society. Israelis very much value life. When someone's dead, they say, okay, they're already dead. What can we do? We need to move on. When someone's still alive, it's since everything needs to be done to protect them. That's sort of the Israeli culture. So all in all, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I think Israel will continue until they're stopped for other reasons, maybe diplomatic reasons, but definitely not because of the cost to IDF soldiers. And final question. Big Jelly TV asks, why are so many soldiers using cell phones to upload content that can be detrimental? Doesn't any video uploaded need to be cleared by the military censors? Should they ban the soldiers from using them, especially if they are filming content that can be used against Israel? Okay, so this is a question I had to talk to a couple of sources about, and basically the story is this. There are rules against all these things. You're not supposed to load videos from a war zone. Soldiers are warned about this, and most soldiers do not. When soldiers do load something like this, sometimes they're disciplined without, hearing much about it. Like they're not put in jail, but they might be disciplined in other ways and told not to do it again. The main reason they're not punished severely is because there would be an outcry. Right now, there's so much support for the soldiers. When soldiers are punished for something, a lot of people support them. It undermines cohesion in the army. Their fellow soldiers don't like it. So the IDF saves that for very extreme cases, um, like the one with the mosque that got so much attention. In other cases, it's lower level discipline. So everything you're saying, they have all those rules. It's all supposed to go through a censor, or you really are not supposed to upload those at all. Right now, enforcement is low because that's the main interest Israel has right now is winning the war and keeping its military cohesion, not in winning the PR, which is something that a lot of people on social media don't understand. Right now, Israel is very focused, keeping morale, striking Hamas, destroying Hamas. The PR war, we're very interested in on social media. Israelis would like to win that. They don't think that they will win that. They're actually probably more optimistic about it than pessimistic about it than they should be, and that's not what they're focused on. Okay, so that's the end of our episode today. If you like the work that I do, think about supporting me on Patreon at Shael Media on that website. Also, check out my podcast, History of the Land of Israel. I just put out a new episode today, and we're covering the entire history of the land of Israel. I'll see you here tomorrow, and keep sending me those awesome, awesome questions.